podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Okay, recording. You have a story to tell, and maybe you've thought, I should start a podcast. Meet Anchor. It's a powerful app that lets you record a podcast anywhere and get it heard everywhere. All you need to do is download the free Anchor app and hit record. Just go to anchor.fm/get started. Your story matters. Make a podcast with Anchor. That's anchor.fm/get started. Great, I think we got it.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis podcast with me, James Graham, as always, joined by George Belshaw and Calvin Betton. But first, we've had an email. You can all get in touch with us via email, lovetennispod@gmail.com. And you can send us almost anything, really. I'm the only one who reads it, so if you do have abuse for George, please do personally message him. I'll send you his address or something. But we've had a lovely email from Mary, who says she's just finished listening to the latest pod and really enjoyed it, as always. She loves the honest way we discuss tennis, their coaches, the players, and all the issues. What has made me right is to say just how much the way you described and discussed the meteoric rise of Emma Raducanu resonated with me. Your discussion about how she's not really playing at number 13 level in the world and how she will struggle going forward. I've thought this, but felt bad thinking it, as everyone is so on the Emma Raducanu hype train. Don't get me wrong, I think she's great and will hopefully inspire loads of youngsters to take up the sport, but I found your discussion really refreshing and honest. Also, as a massive Andy Murray fan, I enjoy your insight and discussions about him. So all in all, great pods. You're all extremely knowledgeable, easy to listen to, and informative. Thanks, guys. Take care. Looking forward to many more. Well, thanks very much for getting in touch, Mary. We're delighted to have such positive feedback. The rest of the inbox has a similar number of exclamation marks, but after different types of words. So, and I don't need those pills, and I don't know who keeps sending me those emails, but they're not required, I assure you. Anyway, thanks very much for getting in touch, and please do drop us an email. As always, if you want to give us feedback, there are lots of ways of doing it. You can leave ratings and reviews, but really only good ones. If you've got bad ones, then please do email us, lovetennispod@gmail.com. We really like hearing from people. I've had feedback recently about the theme tune. Thank you to Danny for that one. He thinks that we should change it. I didn't tell him when he said that to me that I wrote it and recorded it myself because I was just, my bruised ego was still being nursed at that point. But maybe we will in the summer have a bit of a think about our theme tune. Do you like the theme tune? Let us know at Love Tennis Pod on Twitter or on email. George, I haven't introduced you for a good 2.5 minutes. You must be hating it. How are you?
Yeah, well, I'm first of all shocked that we have our own email address. That's literally the first I've heard of that.
Now, there's a lot of things that happen in the background, George, that you don't know about.
And also, I'm at my parents in Birmingham for a couple of weeks before I move house in London, and I've got my keyboard here, so I could always write as a new.
That's huge news. This is huge news. Calvin, I think you are the stone cold drummer here, aren't you?
No, I'm a guitarist.
Oh, God. Well, I think I might be playing tambourine there. I might be Bears.
I've got my trombone as well.
Vibes.
Oh, dear. This theme tune, I mean, honestly, Danny, you thought it was bad before. It's only going to get worse, I can assure you. Right, with no further ado, let's crack on with this evening's podcast. There's loads to talk about, of course. We'll chat about Taylor Fritz and his victory over Rafael Nadal, a bit about Carlos Alcaraz, Nick Kyrgios, of course, our favourite topic of conversation. Daniil Medvedev's lost his number 1 ranking once again. Is that the end of him? I mean, I'm joking, but also, is it? Iga Swiatek picked up another title, and she goes to number 2 in the rankings for the first time in her career. And of course, Maria Sakkari was on the other side of that final. We'll talk about Harriet Dart. We'll try and cover a bit of the Miami draw, although I haven't seen a huge amount of it, but I know George has been scrutinizing it carefully since it came out a couple of hours ago. But there is only one place to start, and that is Indian Wells, where so very many things happened over a 10-day period. Of course, Naomi Osaka's quite troubling exit from the tournament was something that we covered last week. We got to the business end over the weekend. The men's and women's final in the same session in Indian Wells, which I liked. No women's final on the Saturday, no sort of lesser billing, both on the Sunday in the hot sun in California. Taylor Fritz was the surprise winner. We had Cam Norrie last time round, and this time we had Taylor Fritz. George, I feel like it's about 2017. I feel like we talked about Taylor Fritz a lot back then as someone who sort of might have made something. And this is quite a big moment for him, isn't it?
It's a very big moment. I remember distinctly in 2017, I think it must have been, sitting with some ATP media bosses in a stuffy room in the back of the O2 discussing the future talents of the game. And at that stage, Taylor Fritz was one they were highlighting as, oh, he's a great American talent and he's really good looking. Let's hope he's good at tennis as well. No, they didn't actually say that, but it did kind of feel like the two had come before that without necessarily the quality. His development was perhaps a bit slower than was kind of tipped back then when there was this whole kind of sale of a next gen. But I think Fritz has genuinely improved quite a lot. He's become a very solid. I mean, the rankings have been a bit messed up today, but I believe he's up to world number 15 now. No,
yeah,
I do.
He was for about 6 hours up to world number 8 because the ATP computer went a bit nuts on Monday morning. And yeah, Roger Federer was like up to 25 in the world again, and all sorts of strange things were happening.
But yeah, I mean, I think he is kind of around that. I would describe him as around that 20 mark at the minute for me. I think he's someone you don't really want to face without necessarily thinking he's right now the quality needed to be a top 5, top 10 player. But as we say quite often on this pod, every player is kind of on their own journey. And while I've never really had Fritz down as a slam winner, this is the sort of win that can propel confidence. And, comparing him to Cam Norrie last year, Norrie, I think we all think he's probably hissing around his ceiling. I'd really be surprised if he went on to kind of crack the top 5, given his lack of weapons. Fritz does have bigger weapons than Norrie, which could potentially, if he can hit his peak regularly, see him go further. But yeah, I'm still not convinced it will get much better than this, to be perfectly honest.
Calvin, I imagine he's someone who didn't play in the college. He didn't play college tennis, which is quite unusual for an American player coming through. He kind of went the junior route. I imagine he's nevertheless someone you heard a bit about, or I don't know, how much hype was there about him coming through?
As a junior, he was decent, but I think the reason he didn't go to college, he had a kid and got married when he was 19, I think, 18 or 19. So I knew one of my friends, he didn't represent him, but he was at the company that represented Taylor Fritz. So he did some work for him. And I think at the time, I think we always thought he was going to be a top 20 player, top 25, top 20 player, I'd say. But it was definitely for a tennis player, it was a strange sort of start to his career that he didn't have I think he got married first. It wasn't a case of, I don't want to put that in the wrong way. It wasn't a case of he got somebody pregnant and then had to get married. He married somebody who he sort of childhood sweetheart, I think, and they had a child quite young. So I don't think he's with her now. I think they've split up.
Do you want to do my weekly trivia?
Of course, and I hope I haven't just looked it up, but yeah, I'm fascinated to know what
I wasn't aware it was weekly.
I think it's kind of inadvertently weekly. I do normally see something, I'm like, oh, that's quite interesting. I'm a bit worried James will have looked it up because I actually did sort of hint at this in the notes earlier. But in the men's side, since 2001, up to when Norrie won his Indian Wells last year, there was only one non-Grand Slam winner who's won Indian Wells. Who was it?
Is this in the men's tournament?
In the men's tournament. So I think it was from 2001 up to Cam Norrie's win last year. Been one player who hasn't won a slam. That's so obviously got like the big four, Murray. I think
the problem is that now that you've said that, all I can think of is players who've won slams. Like it is virtually impossible to think of anyone else. I don't know, John Isner?
Not John Isner. I think he won. No. Did he win Miami?
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah. I haven't got one.
I don't know what it is. I saw that the last 5 winners of Indian Wells were all first-time Master Series winners, which was interesting.
Come on then, George. Who is it?
It is Ivan Lubicic.
Oh, crikey. I think we could have been here for a while if you were going to wait.
I was going to give you a few more clues and say they are linked to a multiple Grand Slam champion. They reach world number 3.
Congratulations if you got that at home. Do let us know at Love Tennis Pod on Twitter. But that I was never getting that. I mean, that's quite interesting, really. Indian Wells seems to me to be a slow, hard court tournament. Like compared to, if you think about the last, I know court speed Claxon sounded, but if you think about kind of the Australian Open recently, the US Open recently, what we know about Cincinnati and places like that, it does seem to me that Indian Wells is a slower surface. I mean, would that explain, Calvin, that sort of, it kind of means that the top players come out on top more often?
Not necessarily, I wouldn't think. I think I don't even know if it's slow. I think it's that it can be so many different things because it's so windy there. Yeah. So generally when it's windy, it tends to make the conditions feel slower because it's hard to hit through the ball as much, hard to get a clean strike on the ball. You can't go as near the line, so you're going to get less clean winners on that basis. And also because of where it is and it's always windy, there tends to be a lot of sand on the court mid-match, which again would slow things down a bit. So it's just a strange place, I think, isn't it? There's nowhere else on the tour that would be like that. Well, I'm not aware that there's any other tournaments that are in the middle of a desert.
Well, I think that's a good point as well. And the crowds don't seem to be great. I mean, we know the history with Serena and Venus. And when I say great, I mean they both don't seem to be great in number or great in attitude to tennis players. And we've seen a bit of that in this tournament as well with Naomi Osaka. And she was not the only one, as it happens. I mean, we talk about Indian Wells as, the fifth slam. Is it still got that status, George? People don't seem that keen to play it. No one turns up to watch it. And we always get odd winners.
I mean, I've personally never been a massive advocate of the fifth slam chat. If there's going to be a fifth slam for me, it's going to be the one that offers the most points. So on that basis, it's the ATP finals rather than Indian Wells. Yeah. But I mean, they try and have like as close to 2-week tournament, don't they? And they've got 128 draws. So I think from that perspective, it's probably the closest thing you get to a slam. And looking back on that list of players as I was doing earlier, does have a great amount of prestige. I suppose we're just more in a bit of a transition state of the tour where we are going to get a few more random winners. And Fritz, I don't want to take anything away from Fritz because he battled really hard. I actually didn't think he was going to play the match full stop, having seen his kind of issues with the ankle in the semi-finals, and B, reading about him cutting practice short on the morning. So it kind of felt like Nadal was just going to steamroll through him. Of course, he had his own issues, but a few things went in Fritz's favour, shall we say. Nadal perhaps finally hitting the wall after an amazing start to the year. Even stuff like Djokovic just being a pillock and leaving his name in the tournament. That massively worked in Fritz's favour because it heavily loaded the top half of the draw and left him with, Rublev as the biggest obstacle for him. So, yeah, I mean, it went in his favour, but he still did fantastically well. And yeah, Indian Wells, still a good tournament, even if I am being a bit down on it.
I wouldn't have it above. I wouldn't even have it above Miami. I always think Miami was the bigger tournament when it used to be the Sony Ericsson one. It's kind of lost a bit of prestige recently because of players pulling out all the time, which didn't always happen. But Miami, or Key Biscayne as it used to be called, definitely used to be the bigger of the two tournaments. Going on to the match last night, something I thought was interesting just in my own mind when I was watching it was, and I think this says a lot more about Nadal, way more about Nadal and how brilliant he is in those circumstances than it does about Taylor Fritz. But when it was a set to Fritz and 3-2 to Fritz, I think it was a set and 3-2 to Fritz, maybe. I don't know who was serving second set, or maybe 3-3. At that stage, I remember thinking to myself, what chance do I give Fritz of winning this match now? And I figured I'd give him 15% chance. and that's it. And I think it was a set and 3-2 and deuce.
Yeah.
And I thought at the time, 15% chance for me, because you've just seen Nadal in those situations so often. And he just wins them so often. He probably does win 85 out of 100 of those type of match in that type of situation. And then I'd say even as it got closer towards the end of that set, I'd probably have given Nadal more chance every time. And when it should really be the other way, you'd give Fritz a bit more chance. But again, something else that I sort of thought was interesting, again, was just watching it and I've said this before, and I'm not sort of trying to beat my own drum about it, but Nadal, relatively, and I'll stress relatively, he struggles against tall guys with decent backhands, and Fritz is one of those. And you'd notice towards the end of the match, he was going to that backhand nowhere near as often as he generally does.
And is that, just to kind of break that down, is that quite simply because they can get on top of that kind of rasping Rafa forehand?
Yeah, it's normally a shot that he can whip his forehand up to their backhand, and the absolute worst he's going to have the next shot is neutral, because he can get it so high they're hitting it. The smaller guys, and I say smaller, when I say that, I mean anything from kind of 6'1" and below, which still is pretty tall. They're hitting the ball from above shoulder height because of the torque that he generates on the ball. And so they're not going to be able to damage him with it. So he's always got neutral. But the taller guys who he plays, and Federer, they can damage him there. So he tends to not go to the backhand as much. And I think that says a lot about Fritz, really. I think that Nadal he had to change his usual tactic against right-handers, which he plays 90% of the time.
It's an interesting. I mean, you'd mentioned the wind earlier there, Calvin, and I don't think the final was as windy as it had been earlier in the week, but there was still plenty of wind kicking around. I mean, is Nadal specifically one of the best wind players around, or as you mentioned earlier, is it just that the better players play better in the wind because they're more challenged?
Yeah, look, the wind. There's two ways of looking at it, and both that are true. Generally, the more windy it gets, it's going to be a leveler, so it favors the underdog all the time, because the best players tend to like. If I played Roger Federer in clean conditions, I'd probably get about 4 points in an hour. If I played him in windy conditions, because of that, I might get 6 on that basis. But then at the same time, the flip side of that is that the players who play well in wind are the more skillful players, the players with better hands, the players who can adjust better. So it's more just that it will infuriate them. But it wasn't as windy. But then, I mean, one thing you can say is that in that tie break in the second set, Nadal had a mini break. I think it was 5-4, and he had a put away drive volley with Fritz completely out of the court. So he had a full court to hit at, and he missed it by a tramline width. So he missed it by a fair bit. And I think that must be down to the wind. So, and that's what matches can turn on. If he puts that drive volley away, which I think he puts away 98 times out of 100, he's 6-4, 2 set points up.
George, how much do you kind of put this victory or defeat, if you like, on what Rafa Nadal was talking about with his chest? I mean, just for people who don't know, he was talking about this chest problem. He was asked in press afterwards, do you know what it is? Is it something new? He said it happened yesterday night, just at the end of the match last night. So that was obviously the semi-final. So finishing that late yesterday and playing here today in the morning, as you can imagine, I didn't have any chance to do any things or even check what was going on. All I can say is it's tough for me to breathe. I feel very, very, and then he sort of, makes a breathing gesture when I try to breathe. It's painful and it's very uncomfortable. It's not the day to talk about what's going on with me. It's his day. We don't need to hide that in my comments, which I thought was quite a nice way of putting it. George, do you think there is an issue going on here?
Yeah. I think there's more than one issue, to be honest. He'd already kind of pulled out in Miami. I think the foot, despite how well he's been playing, I still don't think he's actually like physically 100% at the minute. Which, tennis players will tell you they're never physically 100%, and that's probably a pipe dream. But Nadal, still, for me, there are a few niggling concerns, and he speaks a lot about the kind of pain he's in quite regularly. So I think it definitely would have played a part. Look, I think Fritz played really well. I don't want to take anything away from him, particularly as I'm talking about. He was not 100% either. So, if anything, it was kind of a leveler on that front. But I think, you have to think Nadal, the way he's been playing, the way he's been coming through really tough matches in this tournament and just through the year generally, probably has just taken his toll on him, to be honest.
It has done his world ranking a good amount of interest, if you like. He's back up to world number 3, which I suppose doesn't make a huge difference to him because 4 and 3 are much the same. But thinking about the French Open draw, I mean, Zverev is now in 4th, and he is in danger of being caught by Tsitsipas. I know Tsitsipas got a lot of points to defend the clay court season, but so is Zverev, and he's not playing particularly well. His head's not in a very good place at all. I mean, it would be quite significant, I think, if Zverev became a number 5 seed and all of a sudden goes from being like a semi-final opponent for these guys to a potential quarterfinal opponent. So just something to keep an eye on in the rankings there. An American winner in Indian Wells, the first one since 2001, when both the men's and women's tournament were won by Serena Williams and Andre Agassi, which just tells you how long Serena Williams has been around. How important is it, Calvin, do you think, for there to be good Americans in the game, if that makes any sense? Does the game benefit more from having Americans in the top 20 than, say, other nations?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it generates more interest in America, which is a huge market, and it would therefore generate more interest as a whole, more sponsorship money, more marketing, that kind of thing, if they're on telly more often. And tennis isn't always on telly a great deal in America, despite them having millions of sports channels, because they've always got NBA or NFL on. I'm pretty sure there's an NBA match going on at any single one time in America, and they've generally got it on. But so yeah, it definitely is. But it seems it's weird. I'm just thinking about it there. It seems so long ago since they've actually had one who would draw viewers in that I can't really remember what it was like. Certainly not in the last 10 years. And to be honest, I'm not sure Fritz is going to be that either.
No, me neither. I mean, we've really entered a new age since there's been a kind of American male star. Obviously, Serena, Venus, and massive superstars and draw massive crowds, both in terms of TV ratings and physically in America. But we've not really had a social media American star. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm not sure that this will propel him to stardom. But apparently, this whole Fritz injury before this Nadal match was captured by this Netflix documentary crew. So if that by some miracle is a hit, Fritz may inadvertently start his path to some sort of social media stardom. But yeah, I mean, it's quite hard to say from here how much this win has resonated in America. But I guess he's a Californian, isn't he, Fritz? So
yeah,
winning in kind of home state as well as home soils. Pretty nice for him.
And in fairness, there are players, Jensen Brooksby is another, and I know Rafa was very complimentary about him in his post-match. So there is some, there are players coming through who aren't, frankly, just John Isner and Riley Opelka.
The problem, I think, is in America as well, though, because of the nature of where they are, and they love calling themselves world champions at sports that they play. And again, this is to their credit as well, to be fair. I'm not sure they're really that much interested in somebody who's ranked 6 in the world, even. I think it has to be world number 1, or they're just not 1 or maybe 2 and competing for finals of slams. They're not like if Britain had somebody if Cam Norrie gets into number 8 or something, he'll be going on chat shows and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Look at Emma Raducanu. She's ranked 13.
Yeah. I do wonder as well whether, and you guys may be able to speak to this better than I can, but I do wonder whether tennis in America, despite frankly, Serena and Venus, tennis still has this like stuffy country club image. I think that's the impression I get from the outside. When you look at where tournaments are held, what type of place they're held at, and what crowds are like, I feel like it still has a very specific image.
Go on, sorry, George.
I was going to say that kind of leads into what I was going to say back to Calvin there, actually. I think the only other way they could hit superstardom is if you had like an American equivalent of Kyrgios, someone who hits a different audience, someone who kind of reshapes, Kyrgios kind of has that more kind of basketball swagger, I suppose, in terms of attitude compared to that kind of challenging those like stuffy traditionalist views in America. I think that's another sort of guy who, if there was an American equivalent, an outspoken, interesting, different style, unique player, that is another way of kind of cutting through that market. But realistically, as much as I like people like TFO, I think TFO is a really interesting character.
Great talker as well.
Very good talker as well. He's not even had perhaps the flash in the pan that maybe Kyrgios did as like a teenager. But yeah, I mean, it is a difficult market to crack for tennis.
Yeah, I think, you're kind of right as well there, James, where you look at where the tournaments are. Although New York, Flushing Meadows in Queens.
Yeah. But look at the people who go to Flushing Meadows.
Yeah, given. And look, most of the tennis in America is played at country clubs, and you have to be very, very wealthy to get in there. I mean, college tennis is quite big in America, but it's quite, as we discussed on the pod a few weeks ago, it can be a bit obnoxious as well, college tennis. And I mean, like we said, TFO is the one. If TFO was just a bit better, or that's probably been a bit harsh. If he could turn his quality into results more, there's a star there. I think if TFO was top 5 in the world, then I think that would pull in a big audience. I mean, Goff's going to come, I think, and I think she will be a star. Yeah, but
sure.
The men's, I'm not too sure who it is really.
I mean, I think Brooksby has something about him. I mean, I don't know him as a person very well, but he's an interesting player, and all the other players talk about him. Korda maybe is the one, because he's got that great sporting family. He's obviously, frankly, and I don't like saying it, but he's a good-looking white lad, and most of America is going to find him more palatable than Francis Tiafoe. Frankly,
I think that's a decent point actually, James, because in America that. They sort of talk about demographics, who watches tennis, that kind of thing. And there was a study recently that said the people who watch golf also tend to watch tennis. So they will equate his sisters with him. Yeah. And that there is potentially a story there. Like you say, Brooksby, I think, is a great player to watch. There's not many players to watch more, but he simply doesn't have a good enough serve to be a superstar like you would need.
Yeah. For people who don't know, Sebastian Korda's sister, Nelly Korda, I think I'm right in saying, certainly was the world number 1 women's golfer for a while, and she is very good. And of course, his father won the French Open. So there's no shortage of sporting talent in the Korda family. So yeah, we'll see. And I also just want to kind of follow up on what I was saying. Obviously, I'm not saying that I think people should be more interested in Sebastian Korda because he's white, but there is a reality that we kind of have to face up to there. And yeah, I've been a massive supporter of Francis Tiafoe. I'm quite a big Francis Tiafoe fanboy. I am in a disproportionate number of his press conferences. And yeah, as you say, I think, George, you mentioned it. I think he's someone who, if he got a run, I mean, he's been to a Grand Slam quarterfinal. I don't think he's been to a Grand Slam semi-final. But you feel like if he got a run and a few people outside of tennis started to see him, play and talk, he's a really cool guy and he's a great talker. And, I think he's just someone who has a lot. And he's only 24. There's a lot more to come from him. Who else can we talk about in Indian Wells this week? Nick Kyrgios. It's amazing that we've got this far and not talked about him in depth, although his name has come up once or twice. A massive jump up the rankings because he's actually bothered to play some tennis. He beat, on his way to the quarterfinals, he beat Sebastian Baez, Federico Del Bonis, Casper Ruud in a real grudge match. Unfortunately, we were denied his match against Yannick Sinner, who pulled out through, I think, I want to say illness, I can't remember now. And then, of course, he had that match against Rafael Nadal, where he went a set down, tanked his way through a tiebreak, pulled the second set back, and then was beaten 6-4 in the third. George, a glimpse into what we could have won, as usual, with Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it was another good week. I think Nick's been playing really good tennis for the last, 12 months, to be honest. When he's turned up. I mean, I think he is genuinely playing some pretty good. I mean, he's always played good stuff, but there seems a little bit more concentration to a degree. I think he's not losing as many really bad matches through kind of complete head losses. I guess that may be one benefit of not just being on the tour all year long, that he's actually not feeling burnt out and kind of lashing out or whatever. But yeah, I mean, look, we say this all the time, tennis is a better place when he's there because he's different, he's interesting, and he makes big matches really, really watchable. Again, meeting with Nadal was brilliant. It was a shame we didn't get the Sinner match. That would have been another interesting occasion. But yeah, no, long way to continue. We've got him in Miami this week. He'll probably have a massive explosion this week. Now I've just said he's been really well behaved.
Well, then he's got to play tennis as well. Miami is the ultimate Kyrgios tournament, isn't it? Kyrgios and Benoit pair, just like competitive private tables. I'm going to read a quote. The misconception about Kyrgios is that he doesn't care. It's not that. You can tell he'd love to win more tennis matches and compete more. His problem is that he can't cope with not winning, not getting his own way. He can't compete with disappointment. That's why he doesn't play. Is that Wayne Gretzky? Is that Bill Belichick? Is it Sir Alex Ferguson? No, it's Calvin Betton. Such wise words, Calvin. Quite remarkable that among all the tweets that you put out, that one really cut through. I mean, just to expand on that, and I'm obviously joking because Calvin has lots of wisdom, and that's why you're all listening to the podcast. Let's face it. It's an interesting point, and I think it's one that not really been made before. Because do you think people don't think about Nick in such a deep way because they just see a spoilt child and they just move on?
Yeah, I think it's shades of grey again, isn't it? I think people think that if you tank, it's because you just hate tennis, you don't like it, and it's also like, let's not forget as well, it's something that Nick says himself a lot. He loves to say that he doesn't care, either directly or indirectly. But I think when you watch him, and I've been around a lot of players who, without trying to sound too deep, you can see it in their eyes that they really don't care. They're really not that bothered if they win or lose matches. And I've had players who I coach who are like that. And I've seen players play against players who I coach who are like that. But when you watch Kyrgios, especially when I watched him the other night, and I've thought this before, you don't get as angry and as worked up when you're not winning as he does if you don't care about winning. That's impossible. And it's not an act. You can see he gets really genuinely frustrated if things aren't going his own way. And I wanted to say, I didn't say in my tweet, that it's not a strength or a weakness, that some people are just like that, and then it ties into other things. Somebody said that it's not that, it's just that he doesn't want to work hard. And that's neither agreeing or disagreeing with it, because because he can't cope with the disappointment so much, he doesn't have the drive to make him want to work as much as that, because he knows that he can't cope with the disappointment. And I think he knows that. I think it torments him that he doesn't get his own way all the time. And you've got to remember as well, and because of the success he's had, and he has had quite a bit of success, and he's quite a wealthy he's quite a good-looking, wealthy young lad who people tend to like because he's a good guy. I doubt he gets much disappointment outside of the tennis court. And so I think that's unlikely to change for a while. Yeah, it's where it's the one place he can't really control things. He was quite interesting. He's always interesting in press. I think we all know that by now. And certainly in Australia, he's always someone worth listening to. I think there's a really good point that kind of plays into what you're saying, Calvin. It's the first question. It's not even a question. The first one, it's just the moderator saying, "Tell us how you felt about that match." And he said, "I sat down with my coach, myself, and I had a game plan and everything was working. 2 points away from the first set. I don't know how Rafa got out of that game. 5-4, 30-15. I just kept replaying that point over and 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 over again." That's a direct quote. Somehow snagged the second, a couple of points in the third. That's just that, a couple of break points. And I think partly it's a point as to how close tennis matches are. I think Nick won 103 points in that match and Rafa won 106. It's just about, but it also kind of speaks to playing Rafa, George, the big points. It's just where he seems to step up every single time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Rafa's a phenomenal competitor, and we're talking about Nick not wanting to lose. If there's anyone Rafa doesn't want to lose to, it is Nick. He really wants to win that match. You can tell he's hyped, and it's a tough match for Nadal because Kyrgios can keep him on the back foot. He's got a massive serve. He's also not afraid to use a few tricks which work pretty well against Nadal, given how far he stands back. And it's just hard to get a rhythm against Kyrgios. And Nadal's very much a kind of a rhythm guy. He wants to hit through people. He wants to kind of, have this slog, have this battle. And Kyrgios kind of can just completely disrupt his rhythm. And it's just a tough guy to keep your focus against, which, Nadal's ludicrously focused normally, but even he has been kind of perturbed by Kyrgios in the past and his antics. So yeah, it's always a great matchup, and it's probably been one of the best matches on the tour, really. I mean, I don't know if you can class it as a great rivalry, given there's not been many slam matches, but it's probably been a match I've looked forward to most when it's happened on the tour the last few years, because it's a great clash of styles. There's been a bit of bite in there before, and they both really, really want it. And Nadal's getting the better of that battle now, but there's just, you see a lot of history, and it's always pretty much really, really close between them. I just on that quote, James, what you said there, the over and over and over and over, him playing it over and over and over again. I'd read a quote that I saw today from Rafa Nadal in a academic paper that I read. I tweeted it on Twitter earlier if anyone wants to read the full quote. And he said, "During a match, you're in a permanent battle to fight your own everyday vulnerabilities, to bottle up your human feelings. If I make a mistake on the prior point, I let it go."
And that's just the opposite of what Kyrgios is saying.
Yeah.
It's like the entire opposite of mindset of how two players think. And I think a lot of people, I had a lot of people reply to me saying, oh, he just needs to get a coach and a mental coach and that'll sort it out. It won't. I guarantee you that. Like it just, that's not going to happen. The only hope he has, I think, of it happening is nothing to do with a mental coach or a sports psychologist or anything. It's getting somebody who he gets along with and he trusts, who also knows tennis and can help him. And I don't know why he really doesn't want to get a tennis coach. I think it's because he might be asked to answer these sorts of questions. But yeah, and the other thing I'll say as well, and I've come back to this before, is that when I say he struggles to cope with disappointment, and I tweeted that after he lost the first set, and I thought, as it went on, I thought he might end up winning this, Then does that make me look like a div then for tweeting it? And it's not, because the one thing he has from tennis that gets him out of that is the serve. Because with his serve, you can be in a complete state of absolute turmoil and you can still get through service games. He'll still serve aces. So he still gets to the second set tiebreak in that situation. Whereas if he didn't have that serve, he'd be in all sorts of trouble.
If you could multiply something 50 times, what would that something be? Milkshakes? Minutes in the day? How about money? The Virginia Lottery's 50 times the money scratcher gives you 25 chances to win on each ticket. You could win up to $3 million playing 50 times the money. Yeah, multiplying money sounds like fun. No offense to milkshakes. Virginia Lottery Scratchers. Everyday wins. Visit a lottery retailer near you. For odds and more information, visit VALottery.com.
Now, one man who probably didn't get as much attention in Indian Wells as Nick Kyrgios was our very own Liam Broady, who, all credit to him, he qualified for Indian Wells Masters in some style as well, actually. He beat Christian O'Connell in the second round of qualifiers 7-6 love to get into the first round of Indian Wells, which for a guy just outside the top 100 in the world is a pretty significant achievement. He played well as well. He took a set off Miomir Kecmanovic, who, in fairness, I think went as far as the quarterfinals, if not even further. Yeah, quarterfinals, and he lost to Taylor Fritz. So, and went on to beat Cilic and Matteo Berrettini. So, a decent performance from Liam there. Calvin, I know you know him well, and I think you watched at least one set of his match against Kecmanovic. It's a decent achievement for him getting to that stage, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I watched all the match actually. He was close to beating him as well. The game when he got broke, I think he lost, was it 6-4 in the third?
Mm-hmm.
In the third, yeah. And I think the game where he got broke, he was 40-15 up.
Yeah.
And he had a couple more break points. It was a really long game. I think he lost his serve at 4-all, and I think it was like a 20-minute game, and he ended up losing it. And then you can see the quality. So Brody's playing really well, and he's just a warrior. He's gonna, if you're gonna play Liam Broady, you're gonna have to beat him. He's not gonna beat himself. Yeah.
He's in Miami now. I saw Dave Samuel, his coach, tweeting that they were in Phoenix playing a challenger and then had to get flights to Miami and had to just run to the airport to try and make qualifying and like sign up on. Dave was on a different flight from Liam, I think, because he couldn't get on the same one. So sounds like a pretty mad dash.
Yeah, Dave's. We have a little bit of an in joke about it. Dave's Twitter is sometimes not as. I don't know the word. He's not quite as good as he is at tennis coaching and mental coach. So he actually put on it. He put something like "Good week here in Indian Wells, off to Vegas now," and that was it. And then everyone was thinking, "What are they going to Vegas for?" And it was actually because the only way they could get the early flight they could get was from Vegas.
Right.
But the way that he tweeted made out that they were going for a couple of days in the sands, like in the Mirage, maybe. But,
yeah, that was right. You're absolutely right, Calvin. To quote his tweet, he says, "Just to clarify, we drove 4.5 hours from Phoenix to Vegas last night to get a flight to Miami. So tough to find a way there." Liam got the last seat on the 12:28. I didn't get on standby, but now on the plane after, so the gamble paid off. Yeah, best of luck to him in Miami. Liam has drawn Christopher Eubanks in qualifying, which is not an easy draw on home soil for Eubanks, but we'll see how he goes. I mean, that match will already be over by the time you hear this, because I think they're playing in the next couple of minutes. Now let's talk about the women's tournament out in Indian Wells, where for once you could argue we got two of the best players in the world in the final up against each other. So I suppose we can't complain about that, especially when Taylor Fritz won the men's tournament. Iga Swiatek lifted the trophy. Well, I say lifted the trophy. She really struggled to. It's a weird sort of glass broad trophy. It's got quite a lot of girth, if you excuse the expression. And she really could barely get it off the stand. But she did earn the right to lift it because she beat Maria Sakkari in the final. She's now up to world number 2, George. Maria Sakkari up to world number 3. And it's nice, I think, I don't know what you feel, to have, well, certainly one, if not two, of the form women in women's tennis actually moving up the rankings.
Yeah, I mean, for the first time since Osaka's dropped down the rankings, as far as I'm concerned, we've got the best two players in women's tennis as world number 1 and 2. Yeah. So, that's what we want. The only criticism I have of Swiatek this season is her losing to Danielle Collins in the semi-finals, because then we would have had a Barty-Swiatek final, which is what I want at Slams.
In Australia, yeah.
In Australia, yeah. But, I've done my usual round of Polish media this week where I swear like a different Polish journalist comes and I wonder if they're all just like on rotation, like, oh, I'll go and get him this time. Just coming out, like slide into my DMs, like, can you say something about Swiatek? I swear I just repeat the same thing every time. Just like, I think she's absolutely brilliant. I think there's no limits to what she can do. She should be winning this tournament all the time. I think we did the interview before she faced Halep, and it's like, well, Halep's a good player, but Halep's past her best, and Swiatek has everything in her armory to beat players like that. She should be dominating, and to be fair, she is. And I think the interesting thing, really, and arguably it makes the semi-final defeat to Collins all the more surprising, is that generally in the biggest moments in the biggest tournaments, she is shit hot, to excuse the phrase. She pumps people in finals. If you look at her biggest finals, you've got a hammering Kenin 6-4, 6-1 in the French Open. I don't think she'd been beyond the 4th round of a slam before that. In Rome, double bageled Karolina Pliskova. We've seen Pliskova have her own dodgy days before, but that's still no mean feat. Kontaveit, who's one of the form players on the tour over the last 8 months, 2-1 in Doha a few weeks ago, and Sakkari's been great over the last 12 months as well, and it was 4-1 again. So she can take the racket out of anyone's hands, and we just need a few more matches with Barty now, and I'll be happy, James. I'll be happy, I promise.
I should point out that Iga Swiatek's on an 11-match winning run. As you say, she's only lost 3 times in 2022. Barty, Collins, and Yelena Ostapenko, which is a result that sticks out a little bit. But she's beaten, I think, 5 top 10 players in her last 8 outings, or 9 outings, I should say. And as you say, quite often very comfortably. She did drop a couple of sets in Indian Wells. I think Clara Tauson took one off her, and Angelique Kerber as well. But yeah, it's quite interesting looking at those two opening round results. She went to 3. She lost the first set in all of her first 3 matches. And her scores after that first set were 6-love, 6-1, 6-2, 6-1, 6-2, 6-3. She absolutely gets going.
This is a rubbish stat because I can't actually remember the stat, but someone on Twitter did point out that the big change with her this season has been her results coming back from a set down. I think there's been quite a significant shift to winning something like 8 of the 9 matches compared to winning 1 of 12 last season or something. That's made up stats, so do not quote them to anyone, but it was a shift similar to that.
You're going to have to do some research on that for next week, George.
Do we think that that's what she got in that hitting session that she played with Andy Murray, that she just kept losing the first set? Seems to be something they both have in common, just throwing away first sets against players who are nowhere near as good as them.
But at least she does win the next two after that. So I think we can give her some credit for that. Her run, incidentally, is worth noting. I mentioned there Towson and Kerber. She then beat Madison Keys and Simona Halep, both of whom are in good form this year, before beating Sakkari, who, as we mentioned, another one in good form. Interesting stat. Well, I don't know about interesting. I don't know about stat. Can anyone tell me how many career titles Maria Sakkari has won? George?
I actually know the answer, so I can let Calvin guess first.
I'm one.
One is the correct answer. She's won just one career title, which I don't know. I suppose she's not been around at the top of the game for an awful long time, but are we not surprised by
that? She tends to be very good until about the semis, and then tends to go to pieces. She lost to Raducanu on that run to the US Open final, and that was there for the taking. In all honesty, she shouldn't be losing to Raducanu when the draw was that open. I think there's been questions about her nerve when it really comes to it.
Yeah. She got to the semi-final of that ridiculously open French Open as well. You know, the one that Barbora Krejcikova won, and she Sakkari was by far and away the best player in the draw, and she lost to Krejcikova in the semis. 9-7 in the third and everything.
The funny thing, kind of on that point, you can see after the semi-final of this tournament, like how much it meant to her beating Badosa and that kind of overwhelming kind of emotion that came with it. You know, I normally criticize that because I'm like, you shouldn't be celebrating like that to win a semi-final when you've got the final coming up. That should be your goal. But in fairness, while Sakkari, I think, has kind of always maybe emotionally enjoyed it too much at the stage and then fallen at the next hurdle, the thing that's impressed me is actually she's then come back the following next big tournament and normally actually backed it up and gone further. So, you know, now she's losing big finals like Indian Wells. It wouldn't surprise me if the next one was she goes and wins Miami or something. You know, I think she does generally learn from that. And, you know, there's nothing wrong really with kind of enjoying big moments. You should be able to enjoy semi-finals and stuff. But I think that has been a little bit of perhaps a weakness in her mentality in some ways.
I mean, you're the only one stopping her enjoying semi-finals, George. I mean, you know, I'm quite happy for her to enjoy semi-final wins all you want.
I think it's always like the tears that bother me, James. It's like, come on, guys, you can actually win this tournament. You're good enough to win this tournament. Like, you know what I mean?
It's interesting. I was having this debate with a couple of my mates earlier on about when Taylor Fritz won. They kind of had a point. They both thought he over-celebrated a bit, being that it was a Master Series and he was sort of on his knees in tears and like. I can see both sides of it. It's a big win for him, but at the same time, it's kind of that. No, what they were saying were like he's celebrating it like he's won a slam, and that kind of is how you'd celebrate a slam, but not how you'd celebrate a Masters Series. Like it's the tears I don't get. You know, it's the like fair enough. You know, long match. He's in a bit of pain, down on the knees, get some fist pumping out, but. I don't get why everyone's crying these days.
I mean, he grew up like not that far away from Palm Springs. Like he probably went to that tournament as a kid. Like I can see it a bit.
The difference as well for me is that one of them's just beaten the greatest player.
That is big.
On paper, the greatest player of all time in a final on home soil, and no one thinks this guy can win a slam. Sakkari is playing in like an era of women's tennis where they're sharing the loot all the time and like getting emotionally overwhelmed in kind of big moments. That's more my issue, is that Sakkari's more than good enough to go and win titles like Grand Slams. I'm not sure Taylor Fritz is at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a thing in sport at the minute, isn't it? The celebration police. Quite a big thing in football, isn't it? Like
Arthur, I don't want to talk about that, Calvin.
When are we allowed to celebrate? Like, how much are we allowed to celebrate winning at stuff? You know, it's like,
or in Man United's case, how much are you allowed to celebrate not winning at stuff?
Yeah, or just being human beings.
Again, though, in tennis, it bothers me more slightly because, like, for semi-finals and quarterfinals, purely because they then have to come back the next day and do it. I don't mind like footballers going mental on a Saturday, and then it's like, week. Cool down, get back, get mentally focused. I just think it's quite hard to come down from that high and then back it up the next few days. That's my own personal feeling. Maybe totally wrong.
I think it is interesting. It's definitely that kind of trying to create that even-handedness, and it's definitely something that you hear the top players talk about. Is like trying to live the high a little bit, but then just to kind of let it go.
That said, I've seen Djokovic go absolutely mental at some match wins. Like, speaking like that one against Fritz where he'd like torn his abductor, which was still
Allegedly.
never quite convinced that happened. But he didn't even rip his shirt at the end of that one. I mean, he did go pretty mad. So,
he was 2 sets down, and dead and buried. Like, I remember because I'd written the match report. Like, I was done. I was like, great, I might be able to finish work a bit early tonight. Djokovic is out. Glorious. And
as soon as you think that, you're not finishing work early. That's the classic curse of working in tennis.
Well, I tell you, and just without getting too sidetracked, but because we've had so much COVID on the desk recently, I've had to cover a few football matches, and I have to say, late goals. I mean, you don't get late goals in tennis. You get tie breaks, like match deciding tie breaks. Bit problematic for writing because what people won't necessarily appreciate is we have to write a story that goes up the second the match finishes. And obviously, if you don't know who's going to win the match, that's quite difficult. And 89th minute goals, 90th minute goals, absolutely. Just honestly, get in the bin. Get in the bin.
Like Federer, Djokovic, that Wimbledon 2019 final was an absolute pain in the ass from that perspective. I mean, Federer literally had match points on serve. I'd basically deleted anything I needed for Djokovic, and then about 4 minutes later, he's won the whole bloody thing.
But that was a difficult match for everyone, George, because the Cricket World Cup final was going on at the exact same time. So we were trying to watch two of the most tense sporting occasions of all time, and they finished within like 3 minutes of each other. It was completely absurd. Anyway, I had just lost my job at the time as well, so I was absolutely steaming. Anyway, I said we wouldn't get sidetracked, and then we absolutely did. Is there anyone else we want to talk about from the women's draw at Indian Wells, George?
Dart, I think, is probably the one we should speak about. I mean, there's one of the shocks of the season, her run this week. I can't believe kind of caliber of opponent she came through, slamming through qualifying, beating Alina Svitolina, beating Kaya Kanepi, eventually being stopped by Madison Keys. But, she's cracked the top 100. I wasn't sure she'd do that, to be honest, with her limitations. British number 2. That's a crazy week. I'm very pleased for her.
Yeah, she came through qualifying, as you mentioned, as we discussed last week as well. And then, picked up that win against Kaya Kanepi. She was beaten by Madison Keys in the end for, I think, a total of just 5 games. Unfortunately, she's already out of the Miami Open. She lost today in qualifying to Tatiana Maria. So not a great start to her time in the top 100, but
not an easy draw, to be fair.
No, quite. For people who don't know Harriet Dart, I mean, she is one of the most, I think probably now she is the most underpowered player in the top 100. I know for a fact she has the slowest second serve that people always talk about. But I mean, everyone has their limitations. Presumably, Calvin, there's not much further she can go with that, is there?
I mean, in theory, you'd think no, but again, I keep saying it's women's tennis. You never know. You wouldn't predict anything there. And I don't know. I could see her going a little bit higher because she does well on the grass and she's not got much to. I don't think she's much on the clay, but she does well on the grass, and there'll obviously be wild cards for her and that kind of thing. And she'll get into Wimbledon, and it's kind of now she'll start getting into main draws and won't have to qualify a lot of the time. She'll be able to pick up some more points. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see her going up towards 80-ish, to be honest.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I think, that's such a massive advantage once you kind of get into that ranking. She's got a year's worth of shots, basically, at Grand Slam main draws with a result like that. So it's really encouraging. And who knows, she may become the WTA's equivalent of Diego Schwartzman.
I mean,
Schwartzman hits a big ball, though.
You might still develop, Calvin.
Okay. I mean, we can only assume so. Am I right in saying that, I don't know if anyone will know the answer to this, am I right in saying that Harriet Dart is in the Billie Jean King Cup team for our trip to Prague over Easter weekend? Yeah. Along with Emma Raducanu, who, she's in the team. We'll see if she plays. Sonny Cartel, I think, as well, is in that team.
Yeah, Sonny's in it. Yeah. Bolter's out.
Yes, no Bolter, no Heather Watson either, because she's struggling, I understand, with a bit of injury and she wants to try and get herself into some different shape. Anyway, good for Harriet Dart. Always good to see British success overseas. Indian Wells becoming a bit of a sort of British stamping ground, really.
Really?
The thing I did want to talk about, which I wrote a little bit about this morning, was that we have this kind of new look top three now, which is great. And it may get upset again because it's so tight in terms of points between like third and eighth. But do we think this is a reasonably well-established order? You know, Barty, Swiatek, Sakkari, Sabalenka kind of disappearing off. I know she's not been very fit. I mean, do we think that Swiatek and Sakkari are the kind of players who can hang around in those rankings? Calvin, I know you say anything can happen. George, something more considered?
Swiatek definitely will. I think Swiatek's going to make a charge at Barty's spot, to be honest. I think she's stepped up a gear this year. We sort of said, I sort of kept banging the drum that she was being at least vaguely consistent last year compared to the majority of women's tennis. But she's now being very consistent and kind of blowing everyone away. We were pretty critical of her after losing to Danielle Collins in the semi-finals, and that would have been a result really where she kind of could have had a bit of a setback. It's gone the other way. I think the French is kind of set up really nicely now with those two, if famous last words, but those two on opposite sides of the draw, both clearly top two players in the world anyway, but on clay especially, I think they've got a lot of advantages there in the way they play. That would be an absolute dream French Open, I think, final for to kind of really showcase this exciting area that we all know women's tennis can provide. So yeah, I don't want to get my hopes up too high, but I think it might actually happen at the French.
Fingers crossed. Let's move on to Miami, which, as I've mentioned, is kind of in qualifying stages at the moment, and first round probably as you're listening to this. Quite an interesting draw, lots to talk about in there, but I think probably good, given time is short, to pick out, well, one match, frankly, because I think it's something we can talk about with some expertise. Andy Murray, I'm not that interested in Federico Delbonis, who I think he has already played this year as well. But he potentially will have Daniil. Well, if he beats Delbonis, he will get Daniil Medvedev in the second round. Now, obviously, Medvedev isn't the world number one anymore because Novak Djokovic, by virtue of not playing, has gone back ahead of him. Daniil Medvedev is the number two, but he is the number one seed in Miami, of course. Calvin, how tricky a matchup is Medvedev for Murray in his current state?
You don't want to be playing him, especially not after Murray's 3.5 hour match with Delbonis, in which he lost the first set and won 6-4 in the third. But also the flip side of that is Murray has got a game that could cause Medvedev troubles. Medvedev's not the most skillful player in the world. He stands miles back. Murray will exploit that on serve, that kind of thing. And yeah, I joke about it, but look, if he's going to have a chance, he can't be spending hours on court with Delbonis. That's something that he just keeps on doing. He just can't do it. Yeah, so he's got a chance, I think. But yeah,
he'll follow your advice and be promptly pumped 1 and 2 by Delbonis.
yeah, and then he'll say, "Talk now, Calvin." Yeah, talk now. I only spent an hour on court.
We've got a bad history on this podcast of previewing matches that never even happened in the end. So yeah, I'm very reluctant to get too carried away.
Quick word: Jack Draper plays Gilles Simon, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Jack will win that, I think.
And then he's got Cam Norrie.
He'll win that too.
Interesting.
Very, I'm trying to think. Has he played him in competitive matches?
Yeah, Noz beat him in Queens last year.
Okay, yeah, of course.
But did Jack beat him at the Battle of the Brits? I know
Jack beat him at the Battle of the Brits. Although different, but yeah. I don't think it was necessarily that they weren't taking it seriously, but there's definitely a different Noz now than what it was at the Battle of the Brits.
Emma Raducanu, incidentally, has probably got Katerina Siniakova, who's obviously currently.
Draw, actually.
Well, she's the world number one doubles player, isn't she? And she's, I think, picked up a couple of decent wins this year. So, yeah, not a great draw. And then she could play Simona Halep in the third round, which is a match that everyone loves to talk about because Halep is supposed to be one of Raducanu's childhood heroes. So, some nice stories there.
Just on that, I know that my mates told me today that apparently Raducanu has signed 2 more big marketing partnerships this week. And they reckon that she's now up to maybe 40 days a year committed to marketing days, which is a lot.
Sound the ka-ching sound.
The real question, Calvin, is how many followers has she got?
I checked, George, and still the same. So, yes, she's still not.
2.3 million now, Calvin.
It's been that for ages.
3.1.
I mean, it's the same since last I checked, but
and she's done 2 new posts since I last looked, so she must be
one for Porsche and one for just herself.
Yeah. So what was the target? Was it 13 million?
13 million.
Like Serena.
I think it was Rihanna we were comparing it to.
Yeah, Rihanna has like 156 million.
Oh, was it Serena who's 13 million? Yeah, I think it was 13. I think that's what we said. It's time. She's still only 18, Calvin. Come on, give her a chance.
Yeah.
Is she 19, George?
She might be now. Yeah, but let's not let facts get in the way here, James. Come on.
One of our mantras here at the Love Tennis Podcast: never let facts get in the way of a good story. I think that's all we've got time for. Although sometimes when I say that, George makes a face and I have to stop. But he looks content. And
I was just going to say that. I mean, we briefly brushed over it, didn't we? That Medvedev losing his world number 1 ranking, but there has been a bit of a furore about that at Wimbledon and stuff as well, about him not potentially being allowed to play there. If he loses to Murray on Tuesday, this could be probably the worst week of his career, this Medvedev.
Well, let's see how that one evolves. I'll tell you what, George, for a quick any other business, getting into Russian geopolitics probably isn't the topic that I need at 10:20 on a Monday night. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thanks very much to Mary for getting in touch and email. Remember, you can do the same. It's lovetennispod@gmail.com. Do leave us a rating and a review and follow us on all the social media. And as always, most importantly, please come back next week.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
The Hit a Big Scratcher from the Virginia Lottery could be a big hit for you. The game gives you the chance to win up to $1 million. Virginia Lottery Scratchers. Everyday wins. Visit a lottery retailer near you. For odds and more information, visit VALottery.com.